Good morning! Unless it's not. Would you believe I got my first ever piece of fan mail? What do you mean, no? Anyway, to mark such a momentous occasion, I wanted to share this letter with all of you. This comes to us from Ohio, and it reads, Dear Stachebrown, I'm tired of spending all my time at my computer
talking about video games.
From Stash's biggest fan. I don't think my mom sent me that letter, or at the very least, she doesn't want to admit it. This isn't technically violating the restraining order. I'm not within 50 meters. So to my biggest fan, I wanted to give you this. It's metaphorical. I don't know why I'm holding my hands up. Clearly the best solution for somebody who talks about video games too much is for somebody else to talk back. That's why this one is for you, buddy. I'm going to talk about my favorite video game franchise of all time. Mild disappointment.
It's no secret Ratchet and Clank is one of my favorite franchises ever. Or at least, that's what I would say if I weren't the internet equivalent of an infant.
I don't know how to walk.
I've been in love with these games from a very young age. I remember being absolutely terrible at the original, crying over lost save data in the sequel, and goofing off in two-player PvP with my siblings in the third game.
None of these sound like good things.
You know what they say, the ones you know the best are the ones you hate the most. Well, they're stupid, I love these games. Yeah, I was bad when I was a kid, but I'm not one of those anymore, I think. And since being a child, I have played through each of these games so many times. I wasn't allowed to play violent games when I was young. Anything rated M was off limits. I was allowed to play T starting at 12, and that is clearly where my parents went wrong.
It's not called 12-teen.
Honestly, the fact that these games were T was always confusing to me for a while. Like, yeah, it's cartoon violence, but it's like Looney Tunes levels of cartoon violence.
What do you mean that's a children's cartoon?
But hey, I'm certainly not complaining. These games are so fun! Even people who aren't aware of the franchise probably know the basic premise. Shoot aliens with weird guns. And what a premise that is. It's not every day you get to spew lava at a giant floating laser whale, but shouldn't it be? They did re-release these games in an HD collection for PS3, making these some of the rare games I actually own a physical copy of.
I own one twice.
I've never been a big fan of physical games, but the PS2 was never a big fan of digital games, and if you look up my birthday, all you get is, he owns a PS2. And since I own the HD collection, I will be using that for footage. Not because it looks better. It doesn't look better. It's just easier to record on PS3.
And yet I always end up talking about Nintendo. It's true, I'm a Nintendo nerd. I'm not allowed to show you on YouTube, but I do have a brand confirming that somewhere on my body. It seemed like a good idea at the time. And I mean, it makes sense. When you grow up in a household that ESRB ratings matter in, it's more likely that your childhood experiences are going to be the family-friendly plumber than the mass-murdering Spartan. But weirdly enough, I actually like Nintendo a lot more now than I did when I was a kid. We did have a GameCube, but a lot of those titles are better as nostalgic cult classics. So growing up, I stuck to my PS2 a lot, and that was right around the time where Sony was going through what I like to call their golden age.
Sony was very quick to establish themselves as a major player. I'm sure a lot of people would probably call the PS1 their golden age, but a lot of people have been wrong before. The PS2 is the best-selling video game system of all time. I don't care how many Crashes and Spyros you have, this was the winner. Actually, I'm convinced if the PS2 didn't have Crash or Spyro, it would have sold better.
Notice I don't own those physical copies. Damn it!
But there are 3 franchises I think make up the absolute best that was available in that time period. As a matter of fact, they're franchises that struggled to make it out of the PS2 era at all. As I've constantly mentioned, I have too much time on my hands, so let's start with franchise number 1.
I wonder which franchise it is.
Insomniac Games was a video game company even before the release of the PS1, but the first thing they made that anyone would really know about is Spyro the Dragon. That's right, the developers of Spyro the Dragon also made Ratchet and Clank. And what's better is the modern Insomniac Games developers are probably best known for creating the PS4 and PS5 Spider-Man titles.
These developers are clearly a huge part of the industry, or at the very least, a pretty consistent part. You don't really hear their names thrown around as often as a lot of the other big players.
Ratchet and Clank is the only golden PS2 franchise to make it to the modern day, but that doesn't mean I'm happy about it. In my opinion, there's been a bit of decline in the quality of these games more recently. I'm not sure if it's just because the IP isn't quite as safe so they won't experiment, or they just hate their fans.
As always, I assume the latter.
But this is a franchise I really love, and to not see a really great title since 2009 just kills me inside. I don't have a PS5 and haven't played the newest title, and while I have been avoiding spoilers, honestly, I don't have high hopes for that game. From a gameplay perspective, the PS4 title was pretty average, and being tied in with the movie actually made it worse. Enemies felt too bullet spongy sometimes, weapons didn't have the same impact, and the story was a total downgrade from the original game it was redoing.
And clearly, my nostalgia is not biased at all. That sentence doesn't make sense, does it? Yeah, I'll admit, I do have a deeper level of love for the earlier titles, but I still play them all the time, and they're such a blast. It's not like I don't like the newer titles either, they're still fine, it's just, I expected a level of evolution from this company that I haven't quite seen yet. So with that out of the way, let's go back to the first game ever and see if it really is better than its newer counterparts.
It isn't.
What?
I know it goes against everything I've been saying for the last 5 minutes, but I actually don't really like the original Ratchet and Clank all that much. Overall, it probably sits right in the middle of the Ratchet and Clank scale. But I'll get to that in a moment. This is the game that started it all, and it deserves a bit of exposition. In the game Ratchet and Clank, you play as Ratchet and Clank.
Fitting.
Ratchet is a cat-human hybrid known as a Lombax, and Clank is a defective warbot who crash-landed on Ratchet's home planet. Since he has a conscience and information on the bad guy, the two decide to team up and explore the galaxy in a sci-fi adventure. These games get compared a lot to playing a Pixar film. I love the whole franchise so much that I could make a solid argument for most of them being the most Pixar, but this one especially holds up pretty well, mostly thanks to its engaging story.
This isn't the real Captain Quark, you numbskull. It's a robot.
A good story is more about the characters involved and how they would interact, and every interaction goes to further the relationship between these characters in a meaningful way. Ratchet and Clank aren't just automatically friends like in other action adventures. Their goals align, but Ratchet really wants to see the universe, feeling cooped up for too long. He's in it for the adventure, and Clank is the one who really wants to save the world.
What a nerd!
The story feels carefully written to not only be interesting, but to follow the characters' motivations as they change into better people. It's something that is altered heavily by the remake of the game. See, in the original, Quark was still a villain, but he wasn't constantly around, which made him a much better character. He was suspicious, but not overly obvious, and it made sense that he fooled the heroes. If I had to sum it up well, the remake seems to swap the personalities of Ratchet and Clank. Originally, it was Clank who was fooled by Quark, because he was single-mindedly trying to save the universe and knew that Quark was a hero. Ratchet isn't necessarily the smart one, but being that Clank is a robot, it makes sense for the Lombax to be the one who better understands emotions and betrayal.
Whoa, sorry. I got a bit caught up complimenting a game that I don't really like all that much. See, the story is fantastic, A+, tell it to your grandkids, but the gameplay is another thing.
Nobody gets it right on the first try, or at least I certainly didn't.
And we're back yet again.
And while I would absolutely hate anyone digging up my past, it's time to really get into the meat of what exactly this game did wrong.
I just don't like it.
At its core, the series is just a space adventure platformer with guns. Neither the platforming nor the gunfights tend to get too difficult, it's just relaxing and fun. Go from planet to planet and shoot bad guys. Ratchet and Clank gunplay is still here to a certain extent, but something about my strange computery brain always liked levels and upgrades and all that stuff.
You don't level up guns by using them. It's a crime. Burn this game in the fires of hell and never let it see the light of day again.
A lot of the weapons are simpler in this game. Just a gun or a grenade, which is fine. They have equally wacky ones too, but without the evolutions, it's just a lot different. Like the economy. Not ours, you dolt.
Weapons don't get stronger with use. There are still a lot of them, and it's still helpful to have them all since they help in different situations. But they're expensive, and so is ammo. So if my weapons don't upgrade with use and just waste money, why use them at all?
As a kid, I didn't realize how easy it was to abuse weapons like the Pyrocitor, since enemies don't take constant damage. But either way you look at it, I'm not being enticed to try out all the weapons and have fun and experiment. Especially when I have to spend money every other level in order to get a key item for progression.
So at that point, you're just taking the guns out of a game known for having wacky guns. What's even the point? But of course, this was only their first attempt, so surely next time they would get it right.
Oh boy, it's time to talk about going Commando again. This is the one I remember most from being a child, and while I definitely see why Up Your Arsenal is usually better received, this game was such a polished experience. In terms of story, overall it's probably a downgrade. Having already gone through character arcs, Ratchet and Clank are just kind of side characters to the story, which means they have to focus a bit more on being funny.
Like me. I said like me.
And it's not the worst story, but comparing it right after playing through the original, it does feel a little bit like they were just trying to make excuses for you to go to new planets. Which is fine and all. I actually really like the story here anyway, and the way they present it. But I never pay enough attention to that because I'm too busy with all of the massive improvements to the gameplay. Ammo is cheaper, the controls somehow feel less stiff, which isn't a problem I knew I even had. There are these new fun segments in the spaceship which you can buy upgrades for to make them a joke, and most importantly, the guns.
Finally! A Pixar game with the right amount of murder!
Every gun in this game, every is in quotation marks, is upgraded by killing your enemies.
In the original, you could upgrade weapons using gold bolts and another high amount of cash, but they were usually a little bit expensive, and chances are you wouldn't even find the upgrade location on the first playthrough. Although if you did, you could have your pyrocitor and eat it too. Each one has a small experience bar, and when you fill it, bam, different gun. Sometimes the new gun has a new trick, usually they're just straight upgrades in some form, and at least once it was a disappointment.
It's like I'm always saying, lava is better than meteors.
But aside from that singular disappointment, this is a blast! Something about the dangerous rush of dopamine I get by upgrading all my weapons and then never using them again is just too much fun. Yeah, I tend to throw away my weapons once they're upgraded, but having them upgraded does help for when fights get a bit too tough. But I still haven't talked about the other major change to this game.
Furries! That can't be right.
While there is a female Lombax in this game, she never shows up again, and supposedly their race is extinct aside from Ratchet, so instead let's talk about space! Everybody loves space. See, look at this survey. And honestly, a sci-fi adventure like this isn't quite complete without a bit of space exploration. Most of the time, spaceships in video games don't work that well, but in this game, they provide a nice change of pace from the main gameplay loop. Along with arenas and bike races I hate more and more every time I play this game, the spaceships just provide short challenges to earn more bolts, usually by gunning down enemy fleets. They aren't super challenging, and there are even upgrades for the ship later on that make the challenges even easier, but unlike the arenas, which are just more gunplay, and the bikes, which were sent by my enemies to destroy me, these spaceship sections are just good fun. Why do I not hate the hoverboard races from the first game? I didn't mention them yet because I forgot. I can't hate something I don't think about.
This is awesome! It's only the second game in the franchise, but they've added some really cool mechanics. Surely they'll just improve upon this space mechanic in the third game. Yeah, they're gone.
What? No space exploration in Ratchet and Clank 3? What the hell's even the point anymore? Well, you can level the guns up to level 5 now, so I suppose the dopamine levels are even more addicting.
This was the first game in the franchise to start what would eventually become a series staple. 5 levels per gun. There was one game that did 10, but that makes me feel uncomfortable, so we need to move on as quickly as possible. Up Your Arsenal once again just improved on the formula in most ways. The story picks back up because this time they decided to focus on Quark. The guns are pretty exciting to have those small boosts in power on your way to that big change. It really was the perfect improvement. Except I'm a picky son of a bitch and you know it.
There's not a whole lot of new stuff to talk about in this game. The gunplay is back with a few new ones that are okay and a lot of returning ones that are great. They took out races and spaceships, but revamped the arena with new platforming challenges. They're okay. Oh yeah, Clank exists. He's been playable in all 3 games, and honestly plays pretty much the same in every game. He's slower and doesn't jump high, but has small pals called Gadgebots to help complete simple puzzles. They're a fine break from the main gameplay loop, but there is one problem that will come up later. And while a lot of things were improved in terms of quality of life and detail, there's one big thing that always gets in the way of this game for me. The multiplayer.
I don't have friends. If I can't enjoy it alone, I can't enjoy it at all. Besides, this was back on the PS2. Games didn't know how the internet worked. The internet didn't even know how the internet worked.
Ratchet and Clank 3 added an online multiplayer mode, also playable offline if you have enough friends in a multitap. But there was still a single-player mode, so why am I bitching?
The doctors don't have an answer yet.
It's not even really easy to describe, but it kind of reminds me of the PS4 remake a little bit. There are those moments that just feel a little off, like they weren't made specifically with the story in mind.
Because they weren't.
Yeah, well, it's a lot more obvious with the movie cutscenes being played in the game for the remake.
Yes, I own that too.
A similar thing happened with multiplayer bleeding into the story. All of the maps for the multiplayer mode appear as special challenge sections of the main game. They're just short mission-based romps, but they try to incorporate multiplayer-specific gameplay for some reason. Like, take over the enemy base. This is totally natural and important to the plot, even though every single one of these missions has the same storyline of...
Sergeant!
Huh?
Here, Sergeant, you can have my gun. There's too many of them! We're all gonna die!
And while they don't add much story-wise, honestly the game would be a bit too short without them, so it was still probably the best call. They probably did it to promote multiplayer, but also to save time and space on assets. However, if you really like these games, like me, you're gonna replay them a bunch anyway. Why, you ask? Well, when you beat these games, they provide the option to go back in challenge mode, which, for the most part, is slightly more difficult, but also rewards more bolts, and aside from the first game, adds mega versions of the weapons to upgrade again. Other than that, though, the game is the same, which makes those Clank puzzles I mentioned before super boring. And lastly, on your second playthrough, you'll probably have the Rhino,
Rip ya a new one.
What did you just say to me?
which makes things a lot easier. In the first and second games, it just shoots a bunch of missiles, but in the third game, you can upgrade it so that it basically obliterates everything on the screen, so have fun.
R-Y-N-O. Rip ya a new one.
And that's pretty much it. 3 solid titles that I replay all the time, and a legacy of disappointment that I'll get into some other time. Nothing in these games was overly groundbreaking, but it was the PS2, it didn't really have to be. I mean, these were the first video games that really looked like games, because the PS1 still gives me nightmares. And the level of detail and polish put onto everything, including the story in these games, it just won't go away for me. I may be easily distracted by new games, but it'll be really hard to replace these titles in my heart. Well, biggest fan, I hope my ramblings have made you feel a little bit more accepted. There are 2 of us now, and there always will be. Oh cool, new mail. It says, stop contacting me.